Death was not the end for the ancient Egyptians, but rather the beginning of the most perilous and important journey any soul would ever undertake. The moment of physical death marked the transition from the world of the living to the Duat, the mysterious underworld realm where the deceased would face trials, monsters, and divine judgment before reaching their final destination in the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise where the worthy would dwell in eternal peace and abundance. To navigate this treacherous journey successfully, the dead needed guidance, protection, and knowledge of the correct spells and incantations that would allow them to pass through the many dangers they would encounter. This essential wisdom was contained in one of the most remarkable documents ever created by human civilization, a collection of magical texts, prayers, and instructions known as the Book of the Dead. Though the ancient Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day, emphasizing the hope of resurrection and rebirth, the Book of the Dead was not a single standardized text but rather a collection of approximately 200 spells that could be selected and customized according to the deceased person's wealth, social status, and specific needs for the afterlife journey. Scribes would carefully copy these spells onto papyrus scrolls, often including beautiful illustrations called vignettes that depicted the deceased successfully performing various rituals and overcoming obstacles, serving both as instruction manual and as magical guarantee of safe passage. If you are fascinated by ancient Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife and want to explore more incredible myths and legends from civilizations around the world, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Your support helps us continue bringing you these amazing stories from history's greatest cultures, combining careful research with engaging storytelling to make ancient wisdom accessible to modern audiences. The journey through the Duat began immediately after death, when the deceased's spa, the aspect of the soul that represented personality and individuality, would separate from the physical body and begin its voyage through the underworld. The Book of the Dead provided spells to help the BA navigate the darkness, to recognize dangerous demons and know the correct names and passwords to speak when challenged by the guardians of various gates and portals that block the path to the Hall of Two Truths. One of the most important early spells in the Book of the Dead was the spell for not dying again in the underworld. For the Egyptians believed that death in the afterlife meant complete annihilation of the soul, an eternal oblivion far worse than physical death. The deceased needed magical protection against the serpents, crocodiles, and other dangerous creatures that lurked in the dark waters and shadowy passages of the Duat, waiting to devour unwary souls who lacked the proper knowledge to defend themselves. The Book of the Dead contains spells for transforming into various animals and divine beings, allowing the deceased to take the form of a golden falcon to fly over obstacles, or a lotus flower to experience rebirth, or even a god to wield divine power. These transformation spells reflected the Egyptian belief that the afterlife was not a passive existence but an active journey requiring adaptability, knowledge, and the ability to change form according to the challenges encountered. As the soul journeyed deeper into the Duat, it would encounter 12 regions corresponding to the 12 hours of night, each ruled by different gods and filled with unique dangers and trials. The Book of the Dead provided detailed descriptions of these regions, the names of their rulers, and the appropriate prayers and offerings to present. Knowledge was literally power in the Egyptian afterlife, and the soul armed with the correct information from the Book of the Dead had a tremendous advantage over one who entered unprepared. The journey culminated in the Hall of Two Truths, also called the Hall of Judgment, where the deceased would face the most critical test of their entire existence. Here stood the great scales of justice, tended by Anubis, the jackal-headed god who served as guardian and judge of the dead. Beside the scales stood Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, ready with his reed pen and papyrus to record the results of the weighing with absolute accuracy and impartiality. Before the weighing could begin, the deceased had to recite the negative confession, a declaration of innocence consisting of 42 statements proclaiming that they had not committed various sins during their earthly life. The soul would address each of the 42 divine judges present in the hall, stating clearly and without hesitation that they had not killed, had not stolen, had not lied, had not committed adultery, had not shown cruelty to animals, and numerous other affirmations of moral purity. The Book of the Dead contained the complete text of the negative confession, and many scholars have noted its remarkable similarity to later moral and ethical codes, including the Ten Commandments. The ancient Egyptians clearly understood that the afterlife was not guaranteed regardless of social status or wealth, but rather had to be earned through ethical behavior and moral integrity during one's earthly existence, a surprisingly modern concept for a civilization over 3,000 years old. After reciting the negative confession, the moment of ultimate judgment arrived. Anubis would carefully place the deceased's heart on one side of the golden scales, for the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of consciousness, memory, and moral character, containing the complete record of everything the person had done during their life. On the other side of the scales, Anubis would place the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order, a single perfect feather that represented absolute truth and righteousness. The weighing had to be precise and fair, with Anubis's divine skill ensuring that the scales measured accurately. Thoth watched carefully, his pen poised above the papyrus, ready to record whether the heart balanced perfectly with the feather, indicating a life lived in accordance with Mat, or whether the heart was heavier, weighed down by sin and wrongdoing. The tension of this moment was absolute, for everything depended on the outcome of this single measurement. If the heart balanced perfectly with the feather, the deceased had passed the ultimate test and would be declared Makeru, meaning true of voice or justified. Osiris, the great god of the underworld, who sat upon his throne observing the judgment, would welcome the successful soul and grant them permission to enter the field of reeds. Horus, the falcon-headed god and son of Osiris, would then lead the justified soul to paradise, where they would reunite with loved ones who had died before them and enjoy eternal life in a perfected version of Egypt. The field of reeds was described in the Book of the Dead as an idealized agricultural paradise where the wheat grew taller than a man, where the deceased could fish in abundant waters and hunt in fertile marshlands, where there was no sickness or suffering or want of any kind. The successful soul would receive a plot of land to cultivate, though the Book of the Dead thoughtfully included spells to animate Shabti's servant figurines to do the actual farming work, allowing the deceased to enjoy the fruits of labor without the labor itself. However, if the heart was heavier than the feather, if it was burdened with the weight of sins and moral failures, the outcome was terrible beyond description. Crouching near the scales was Ammit, the devourer of the dead, a composite monster with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, combining the three most dangerous animals the Egyptians knew. Ammit would immediately consume the heart of the failed soul, causing their complete and eternal annihilation, erasing them from existence so thoroughly that it was as if they had never lived at all. This second death, this final destruction of the soul, was the ultimate horror for the ancient Egyptians, far worse than any physical suffering. To be devoured by Ammit meant no afterlife, no reunion with family, no participation in the eternal order of the cosmos, just absolute nothingness forever. The Book of the Dead emphasized the importance of living a moral life precisely to avoid this fate, making it clear that no amount of wealth or social status could save a corrupt soul from Ammit's jaws. The Book of the Dead also contains spells specifically designed to prevent the heart from testifying against its owner during the judgment. These controversial spells essentially asked the heart not to reveal sins to the scales, leading some scholars to question the ethical consistency of a system that claimed to value truth while providing magical loopholes. However, other scholars interpret these spells differently, suggesting they were meant to calm the deceased's anxiety rather than actually deceive the gods, who in any case would see through such deception. The physical scrolls of the Book of the Dead were works of art, as beautiful as they were functional. Skilled scribes spent months carefully writing the hieroglyphic text in columns and rows, using black ink for the main text and red ink for titles and emphasis. Artists then painted elaborate vignettes showing the deceased in various scenes from their afterlife journey, always depicted as successful and justified, as if the illustrations themselves could magically ensure that outcome. Wealthy Egyptians commissioned personalized copies of the Book of the Dead with their own names inserted into the spells and custom vignettes showing them in their finest clothing and jewelry. These scrolls could be dozens of feet long when unrolled, representing a significant investment of money and craft. The scrolls were then placed in the tomb with the mummified body, positioned where the deceased could easily access them when they awoke in the afterlife and needed to begin their journey. Middle-class Egyptians who could not afford fully customized scrolls could purchase standard versions with blank spaces where a scribe would insert their name before burial. The poorest Egyptians might have only a few key spells written on their coffins or on small amulets placed within their wrappings. The democratization of access to afterlife knowledge, even in limited form, represented a significant evolution in Egyptian religious thought, moving from a time when only pharaohs were thought to have an afterlife to an era when all Egyptians could hope for resurrection. The Book of the Dead evolved over more than 1,000 years, with different versions appearing in different periods of Egyptian history. The earliest versions, called the pyramid texts, were carved on the walls of Old Kingdom pyramids and were exclusively for royalty. These evolved into the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, which expanded access to nobles and wealthy individuals. Finally, the New Kingdom saw the development of what we call the Book of the Dead, available in principle to anyone who could afford a copy. Different religious centers in Egypt emphasized different spells and had their own local variations of the Book of the Dead. The version from Thebes might differ slightly from the version from Memphis, reflecting regional religious traditions and the theological preferences of different priesthoods. However, certain core spells appeared in almost all versions, including the spells for the weighing of the heart, the transformation spells, and the declarations of innocence. The impact of the Book of the Dead on ancient Egyptian culture was profound and pervasive. It shaped funeral practices, influenced art and architecture, guided moral behavior, and provided comfort to the dying and the bereaved. Knowing that their loved one had been buried with a Book of the Dead gave families confidence that the deceased had the knowledge and tools needed for a successful afterlife journey, transforming grief into hope and death into transition rather than ending. The Book of the Dead also reveals the sophisticated philosophical and theological thinking of ancient Egyptian civilization, the emphasis on moral judgment, the belief in cosmic justice, the idea that ethical behavior in life determines afterlife destiny. These concepts demonstrate a level of abstract reasoning and moral development that challenges simplistic views of ancient peoples as primitive or superstitious. The Egyptians wrestled with the same fundamental questions about death, justice, and the meaning of life that continue to occupy human thought today. Archaeological discoveries of Books of the Dead have provided invaluable insights into ancient Egyptian religion, language, and culture. The famous Papyrus of Ani, dating to around 1250 BCE, and now in the British Museum, is one of the finest surviving examples, containing a nearly complete version of the spells accompanied by exquisite illustrations. Studying these texts has allowed modern scholars to understand Egyptian beliefs with a level of detail that would be impossible from material evidence alone. The influence of the Book of the Dead extended beyond ancient Egypt itself. Elements of Egyptian afterlife beliefs influenced Greek and Roman thought, and some scholars have suggested possible connections to the development of concepts in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, though such connections remain debated and difficult to prove definitively. Regardless of direct influence, the Book of the Dead represents a universal human response to mortality, the need to believe that death is not the end and that justice will ultimately prevail. In modern times, the Book of the Dead has captured the imagination of artists, writers, and filmmakers, though popular culture often misunderstands or misrepresents its true nature and purpose. Far from being a book of dark magic or curses, it was fundamentally a guide to help the dead navigate the afterlife successfully, a combination of religious text, moral code, and survival manual for the journey beyond death. Today, fragments and complete scrolls of the Book of the Dead can be found in museums around the world, silent testimony to the hopes and fears of people who lived thousands of years ago but who shared our fundamental human desire to transcend mortality and find meaning beyond the brief span of earthly life. When we read these ancient texts, we connect directly with the spiritual yearnings of our distant ancestors, bridging vast chasms of time and culture through our shared humanity. The Book of the Dead reminds us that the ancient Egyptians viewed death not with passive resignation but with active preparation and hope. They believed that with proper knowledge, moral behavior, and divine assistance, any soul could navigate the perils of the underworld and achieve eternal life in paradise. This optimistic view of the afterlife as achievable through merit and preparation represents one of ancient Egypt's most important and enduring contributions to human religious thought. This video represents a collaboration between human creativity and artificial intelligence, combining research, script writing, and production techniques to bring ancient stories to life for modern audiences. We hope this exploration of the Book of the Dead has given you a deeper appreciation for ancient Egyptian spirituality and the remarkable sophistication of their beliefs about death and the afterlife. You can find links in the description to the tools we use to create this content, as well as books and products related to Egyptian mythology and ancient wisdom that can deepen your understanding of these fascinating topics.